Hi, Noelle.
Hi. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Well, I know we're both not super familiar with this platform, so it's kind of fun to do it together.
Yeah.
And it's really good to see you as close to in person as possible.
You too.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just jump right in then.
Sounds great.
So Noelle, I'll explain to our viewers, was going to have a show at Blue Sky for as the Critical Mass Solo Show Award from 2019. And for those of you who don't know, Critical Mass is an annual photo competition put on by Photolusida. And that's a nonprofit organization here in Portland. And also to all you photographers out there, they still have applications open. So it's a really great way to get your work seen by a lot of curators. So, and Blue Sky every year has an exhibition from that group of submissions. So we were really happy to have Noelle as our winner for 2019. Unfortunately, the show needed to be postponed because of the pandemic. So we will be showing X-ray vision versus invisibility in February 2021. So instead, for right now, we're going to talk a little bit about Noelle's work. We can kind of talk about a bunch of different things, but yeah, so let's see. I mean, I know it's been a heavy week. There's been a lot going on, so I just want to acknowledge that before we begin.
Has been, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, how has it been where you are? I know you are an associate professor at the University of South Florida. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm in Tampa here. Well, there's been a lot of activity. Our Black Lives Matter group here is very well organized and very active, and so we've had quite a few very well organized protests, and they seem to be happening daily at this point. There was a big one today that the rain, I think, put a damper on because we're getting these like monsoon rains. It's starting to be that season. But I mean, for the most part, I think that what's happening is long overdue, and it's a weird perfect storm in some ways. I feel like between, in a way, like the coronavirus, I think has allowed this to happen at a much greater. It's allowed people to like focus on this issue in a way that maybe hasn't happened in the last 30 or 40 years, maybe since 1968. People are drawing comparisons between now and the uprisings in 1968, and it's really become. It's really, I think, heartening to see the sort of global support in a time when people are actually having to kind of make the decision whether or not they will subject themselves to the potential of getting sick to go out and protest. And I think that is. In some way, like the stakes being higher makes it more meaningful.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that like any city, Tampa's bumbling through it. We have a really great mayor who I think it is is doing her best, but I think there's multiple sort of. With any city, there's multiple bodies of power that are not necessarily in line with one another, and so there's some strange contradictions going on and things. But we're faring as well here as any other place, I think. So
yeah. Well, and I know one of my questions I had for you is, how. I guess let's move into something a little different. Actually, I'm
sure.
thinking.
I'm sure we'll get back to it.
I think what's always interesting for me to know about an artist who is also a teacher, and how did you decide? Oh, I want to make this my life's work. Like I want to make art and I want to teach, and how do you balance that? I know that's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that coming up in undergrad, especially, the people who at the time I really respected as artists were also teachers. And so I thought, oh, this is how one can make art outside of a gallery system or outside of the pressures of a gallery system. Not that they were all entirely outside of that system, but their work reflected a sort of liberty that comes with not having to put your, where you're getting rent from and where you're getting your food from, like on the work, right? And so I appreciated that freedom. My teachers in undergrad, Daniel Martinez was a huge influence on me. And then in grad school, artist named Barbara DeGenevieve, both of whom have photo-based interdisciplinary practices. And so I think maybe that's just coming to a realization now.
It all makes sense.
They both are dealing with or grappling with photography, right, as a medium. Sometimes through sculpture, or through performance, but are both grappling with that.
Yeah, and I think I read in an interview with you that you are trained as an actor and you teach sculpture, correct? That's right. Okay, I mean, that's so interesting to me because especially, facilitating mostly photo-based shows that are very entrenched in the photography world, it's interesting to hear more, especially for our audience, about like your interdisciplinary practice and like what drew you to photography out of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, well, so what's interesting about photography is that, so I went to UC Irvine. I grew up in California, and Irvine has this long history of being very connected to a physical theater style called theater cruelty that was sort of invented by a guy named Anton Artaud and Kuratowski, who was one of the other major influencers in that, or influential artists within that genre, taught at UC Irvine, and so his kind of tradition lived on there. And it's a highly physical type of theater, where physicality drives the emotional kind of state, which can be seen as like the opposite from like Stanislavski or like the method acting tradition, where like you get into the psychology of a character first, right? So it's sort of the reverse of that. Okay. And so that kind of naturally led into, because we were doing experimental theater, naturally led into kind of more of a performance installation situation. Mm-hmm. And I became more and more interested in performance as like a static kind of durational experience, or more static than narrative, or I guess like non-narrative durational experience. And Chris Burden, who went to UC Irvine, is a hero there, right? And so in the 70s, there was this huge movement in performance art that was so based in many ways in terms of its ability to be seen outside of the initial performance through video and photography, right? So there was this integral relationship between performance art and photo and video. So I've never really, in some ways I never really thought about it as moving into those things. They were all just always present as the way in which one goes about communicating these artworks, right? So
yeah, that makes sense. With the long history of documentation, in addition to it being part of the performance as well.
Yeah.
I just want to pause for a second and let people know, if you have questions for Noelle, there's a little question box at the bottom that you can click on, and then it's easier for me to see the questions. But you can also put them in the chat if you don't see the question box. But anyway, so I'll keep asking questions, but if you do have questions, chime in and we'll get to them. Speaking of performance, I was really, before we get to talk about the work that's going to be at Blue Sky, I was really interested in your series. Let me look at my notes here. It was called Incident Report. So, yeah. I mean, I know you've done other performance-based work, but this one was particularly, it caught my attention just because of the process. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It's very photo-related, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's, in many ways, so, all right, where to start from this? I am a professional skydiver, in addition to being an artist, and people are like, what does that mean? I can coach skydiving. I can have at times had my license to teach people how to skydive. I also compete at a nationals level in skydiving. And so it's a huge part of my life. And for years I thought, how do I bring this into my practice? Because it's this really weird kind of, I don't know, like extreme sport jockey kind of thing in many ways. That didn't really fit with like what I was interested in. And in terms of image making, it's so like overly imaged, right? Like everyone has 10 GoPros and images are always about like the fastest possible shutter speed. My solution was essentially to take pinhole camera photographs while skydiving. And I was thinking like, okay, you know, it's just like do the opposite, right?
Right.
Do the thing that like makes no sense. But then what's interesting about it is that it actually became a way in which one could make a pinhole camera image of someone falling, which because of shutter speed or because of how long the exposures are, that's not possible if you're not also falling with your subject, right? And so Incident Report is a series of pinhole camera photos taken while skydiving, and they're taken over about 3 seconds, which is approximately 500 feet of airspace. And so of people falling with me. And then they ended up turning into sort of like homages to people that or kind of memorial pieces of people who I've known in the sport who died while skydiving. And so they're paired with these kind of bureaucratic incident reports that are put out in the monthly skydiver newspaper, like magazine. Right? And in all of my work, I'm really interested in this kind of like finding the sort of rub between the kind of emotive, poetic, human experience of the world and our lives as kind of tied up in surveillance and bureaucracy and the state, in state power and the kind of like anonymousness of that. So like the contemporary subject being formed by these two extreme positions in some kind of way. And so, so that's Incident Report.
Okay, that makes,
essentially in a nutshell.
And that's so interesting, especially right now as we're seeing video or like documentation of like I guess surveillance, but surveillance of surveillance in a way that is just a whole other thing. But it kind of brings me to, I guess we could start talking about your work that we're going to show at Blue Sky, X-ray vision versus invisibility. I know you've been working on work about violence and surveillance and how we process trauma through imagery. Do you want to talk a little bit about your inspiration for that series?
So that series in specific came from, I have a personal connection to the border because I grew up there. I grew up about 4 or 5 miles from Tijuana. on the California side, a city called Chula Vista. And so I grew up going back and forth, this kind of permeable membrane, but it was permeable because of looking the way that I did, right? And like my citizenship of the United States was never questioned in the way that my friends were, because I was blonde and fair-skinned. And so I think like that kind of disjuncture as a child of like recognizing the different sort of the state's relationship to me, the kinds of questions that I was asked and they were asked like at a young age, like started to seem, that was at like the point of confusion, I think, as a child. Like, why am I treated differently? And so, like, it kind of, my interest in the U.S.-Mexico border and the relationship of that space kind of starts in, or is grounded in, like, that kind of childhood misunderstanding or confusion or inability to understand or grasp any measure of the political situation that was happening there. And so that sort of dovetailed onto an interest in surveillance that I've had for a long time as well. And so when I saw these images coming from the U.S.-Mexico, I became aware of this technology around 2006, backscatter imagery. And so I started making these embroideries, essentially, of those images, which are like a type of X-ray that is lower radiation than your typical medical X-ray, but essentially can X-ray trucks, and started looking at the vision and then satellite imagery, right, that was being used essentially to kind of rationalize or dissect the space in a very particular way, and how this machine vision was being essentially designed outside of a mimetic representation for humans. So it's like the machine vision is being designed for specific types of information and leaving out other types of information. And I was interested in trying to kind of shove some of that information that it was leaving out back into the image, right? To use like the kind of sensual quality of these images to kind of heighten them in a way that would bring the kind of physical body back into the images themselves and give them a new life as a kind of critique of that use of sort of machine vision. I don't know.
No, the complex body of work, so like a long answer is appropriate, but and I think also I think you've talked about it a little bit in other interviews, but these images are fairly abstract, like they make something very human abstract, and so you're bringing it back into this place of the human body as you're using different tangible ways of manipulating the image, like with the cyanotype or with is it cross stitch with the
cross stitch?
Yeah,
and tapestries. That I mean that's like the funny part about doing these digital things or having the work shown digitally. Is the point is really to have to confront an object that is different than your screen, right? Like materially different, and that we have a different physical type of relationship with. And I actually, I I really embrace the space of the gallery, sort of secular humanist. Like the gallery space is like church to me, in a way, right? That there is, it does have this very kind of like going to an art gallery and like grappling with somebody's like work has a very cleansing effect and a clarifying effect and an effect of being able to kind of really think about something in a way that I don't feel the space outside of the gallery allows me to do that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that galleries are really fighting for, you know, before even like now that we are, you know, needing to stay at home for the most part, you know, seeing art in person until your city or county opens up, it's not something that's maybe as possible. But, you know, even thinking about like how do we navigate photography or other art forms digitally, and you know, like I, as an exhibition manager at Blue Sky, but also as somebody who ran my own gallery, like sometimes I felt like, oh, is this pointless? Like, does
yeah, and you know, like photo and painting, in some ways, like some people might argue that they are easier platforms to move online, right? Because we tend to think of them as two-dimensional. But in some ways, I think when you photograph a sculpture and you put it online, people understand that they're not experiencing the object in the way that they should. They feel the desire to like, oh, I wish I could get closer and like move around the thing.
Right.
And we have this illusion with photography that we can just zoom in and know what a sense of scale is like, and we can't, right? I mean, a photograph that's meant to be 30 feet wide. You can't exchange the experience of seeing a Jeff Wall photograph, right? In the space, huge and lit up, for a cell phone screen. You know, it just doesn't have the same, like, there's major elements that are lost. And the materiality of photography is important, and I think that a lot of people don't talk about that enough, right? The surface that was chosen, the paper that was chosen, the frame that was chosen, the way in which something's arranged in its space, and the way in which it sort of pushes and pulls you to walk around that space. I think all of those things are vastly undermined by the ease at which we put photographs on digital medium. You know, for honest.
Well said.
Yeah, and I think these are all considerations that, artists have to take into account, even though, and I feel like now there's even more options available. So it can, those choices, just like anything, can be quite overwhelming. And I'm sure as an educator, you field many of those questions from your students. And
yeah, it's because I do teach sculpture. It's sort of an object lesson in a way, because I come into class and I haven't told them where in the room they should put their pieces. We've just talked about how they attach to the room. So and they're always around the walls. Right?
Oh, so nothing in the middle.
Yeah, so like they'll put it on a pedestal and then shove it against the wall. So it's like the first class or the first critique is always like, all right, everyone spend 10 minutes moving the work into the center of the room. You made a three-dimensional sculpture, and we can't see 25% of it.
No, that's a really good lesson, because I'm sure I would do the same thing, because I'm so used to just putting something two-dimensional on the walls. I would. That's a good thing to think about. And also, as the gallerist, I'm always like, is someone going to knock this over? But sometimes that's part of the fun, I guess.
Well, there's this great Ad Reinhardt, the painter, who painted like black squares, in the
Mm-hmm.
70s. Had this great quote, which I think he meant very like disparagingly, but I take as like a point of pride, is like that sculpture is the thing that you trip over when you're backing up to look at a painting. Like, that's the point, right? That's the point of sculpture, is that it is an embodying experience, right? And so,
Yeah.
the photograph from a kind of image that is infinitely reproducible to something which is concrete and in space with you, in a very particular way. So,
Yeah. Are you currently working on things that are more sculptural right now, or do you kind of? I mean, you work with everything, but
yeah. I mean, I'm working on cyanotypes right now, and a little bit of the tintypes, which we talked about.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of starting to experiment with that. And I've made one that I'm satisfied with, but I'm still kind of learning the process. And so, but I have my studio set up at the house, so it's been actually nice, not being able to go anywhere, because I have nothing to do but focus on making work.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
It's actually the fact that like things have been canceled, and it's actually given me some time to sort of experiment and play around. And the last couple of years, it's felt like I'm, pushing towards deadlines, and so now I have a little bit of a break that I can kind of fuck around with things a little more,
Yeah, totally. Well, when you emailed me back to say like, oh yeah, I'd like to actually experiment with tintype a little bit, I was like, oh yes, let's do that. Yeah. Just because I'm always interested to see just all different types of photographic processes represented, or like in your case also, like how can we move photography into a more three-dimensional or sculptural realm, because that is just fascinating to me. Probably because I spend so much time with two-dimensional photographs, which I love, but yeah.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting people, I think, doing that. Zemie Barr, I don't know if you know his work, but he's a really wonderful photographer / dancer.
Oh, okay.
I think he was trained as a dancer, and so he makes these kind of installation performance photographs that are, where he's kind of treating the photograph like a physical object, so it might sit on the floor as a roll instead of something that's been flattened.
Okay.
And so his body kind of moves around the object. But yeah, he's really, really wonderful.
Okay.
Check out Zemie Barr.
I will. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. It looks like we have a question from someone out there. Let me look here. Oops. Here we come to my. I think the question is, could you talk a little bit more about your choice of using cyanotypes for that project? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, as I said before, but I'll repeat, I first started with those images as making embroideries of them. And at the time, they were difficult to find because there wasn't many people using this technology. It was pretty experimental. And now the images are, I have hundreds of them in my data bank of images. And so I wanted a way of representing more of them than I was capable of doing with the hand embroideries. Because one embroidery might take me a month and a half to make, So I'm fortunate to work at the university where there's a print atelier called Graphic Studio, which does a lot of really amazing work in different types of 19th century printmaking processes, including cyanotype. And so I was able to learn this process through some of the printmakers there, and it seemed like, for me, the imagery had this sort of architectural elevation aspect to it, which seemed appropriate for seemed appropriate in terms of the history of cyanotype, and I wanted to really bring in the history of photography into this project as a type of character within the project, because it really is very much about like the history of Western image making in relationship to colonialism, and so because of the sort of way in which the images look and in the sort of history of photography, it seemed like a good fit to me. And then in my researching of cyanotype, so the chemical that is made, right? It's commonly known as Prussian blue. Is the in terms of like the paint, the chemical that's made, the chemical compound that's made with cyanotype that makes this Prussian blue, and that's actually a something that's taken orally to treat radiation poisoning.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
which is kind of a totally sort of different type of anecdote that I don't really expect people to know, but kind of felt like I locked in on the right image for the right type of process in a way. And the other thing about it was that it has this really wonderful blue color that was used to paint the ceiling of, 14th and 15th, like chapels in the 14th and 1500s. So like Giotto's like Scrivini Chapel, these like blue night skies, right? That have like, and so I thought, oh well, this would be really wonderful in an installation to have these like, all of these cyanotypes, like kind of creating this monochrome experience of sort of this night sky of blue that has been used in sort of religious chapels, the early, not really Christian, the early Renaissance like chapels and that kind of thing. And so all of those things came into the factor of using this. Not only, like the easy thing to say is like, yeah, you're taking like a machine vision process that has really no materiality and putting it into like a 19th century process, right? Mm-hmm. And like, yeah, that juxtaposition is there. But for me, it's about how physical cyanotype is, right? That it's really like, it's one of the most kind of tactile photographic processes, I feel like, in a way. Kind of depth. Maybe photogravure is like the most, but like this and tintypes, they have this real kind of tactility to them, because that paper like has to be able to take quite a bit of working. Yeah. So it's like this watercolor process. That answers the question.
Yeah, I think. I know what you mean about the tactility and also the process of working with cyanotypes. It is actually fairly labor intensive. I feel like a lot of analog photography is in a way. And was there anything else specific, like with the tintypes, besides it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I test this stuff out first. It's like I'll try different things with it, but this one kind of happened. Like I got a almost immediate, once I did the test, it was like an almost immediate like reaction of like, oh yeah, this is right for this process, because I'm making tintypes of infrared images of people crossing the border. So they're essentially walking through the desert. And so the tintypes have this real kind of double take where it appears to be something from like a Dust Bowl image, right? So it has this real connection to Western expansion, and the sort of imagery that was being made then of these migrants who were leaving their homes because of drought or because of financial reasons or whatever, and coming out west. And here, these images, essentially, you kind of have to do a double take with it. So it really kind of equates this migration, or connects this current migration to the sort of history of American migration. And I mean, also super seductive as an object, right? And they're kind of precious on a computer screen.
Yeah.
Right? This like feeling of kind of like fragileness and care and tactility. And it's like sometimes mistakes happen where your thumbprint gets stuck in emulsion or whatever. So it's so you have these other layers of kind of like human trace that's part of the image, which is just not part of infrared image, right?
Yeah. And I think with the tintype too, it adds to this sort of nostalgia, which you were talking about a little bit with like how precious it feels, but also like that coincides with this idea, like the American myths of like manifest destiny, and whereas it seems like it supposedly is very separate type of migration because of like often just because of where the people are coming from and who they are.
And it's true that it seems that way, and yet it's the sort of the myth, right, that has been exported, right, that still propels people to want to spend a year's worth of savings to try to come across, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So that myth was the same myth, right? That was like, this sort of like myth of prosperity, or myth of like being able to have a place, or I don't know.
Yeah, it is really interesting to see those correlations. And I was just been thinking about this because when we were looking at the series, someone pointed out that when they were searching, like learning about backscatter imagery, they found some posters of some of the images on Walmart. And maybe did you like on an online Walmart website, or like some other, like you could buy a poster of the image, not the cyanotape image.
Oh,
but,
no.
But
just
so that was
interesting.
That is?
No, I know that they have. I've seen them on stock photos. There's like backscatter imagery that is part of like stock. I mean, that's the thing. They're seductive. Like there's a certain level at which we tend to not typically talk about our susceptibility to the aesthetics of surveillance imagery, right? But it is, it's really seductive, and it's really aesthetic and beautiful in a particular type of way. And I think to deny that is to deny like the power that imagery has over us in many ways, right? And so, I mean, I think that's part of the complication, right? It's like, how can it be so beautiful and be so kind of horrendous? I mean, I think people, if you're honest with yourself, felt this way about watching 9/11, which is that, like, we both find pleasure in seeing this because we've generated this image in Hollywood films over and over and over again, right? But then we have to come to terms with the real and the kind of like virtual experience and the clash of the two, and I think it sends us into a total tailspin.
Yeah.
It's like we can't compute the two, right? The two experiences, they're a contradiction. We don't like to think of ourselves as contradictory creatures.
Definitely, yeah, and especially when you're trying to show work that maybe is socially concerned, and like how, what point do you cross a line from aestheticizing suffering, or
and I think there's good conversations being had right now about this in terms of the George Floyd video, right, or the Ahmaud Arbery video. That to just repost it without concerning yourself with the fact that it causes the trauma that watching this video causes, it can be consistently re-traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have a duty, in a way, to bear witness, but to also recognize that watching something like that has a pornographic, or can have like a pornographic element, which you start to gain pleasure in the experience of seeing violence done to somebody's body. Mm-hmm. And in your reposting of it, you can create trauma in another, a traumatic experience in another. And so I feel like those dialogues are being happening now, but maybe not on a wide scale, because I think it's a tightrope walk, right, with imagery.
It definitely is, especially with and I've seen a lot of discussions happening on social media about that, and because they want to bear witness so that, someone is held accountable.
Yeah, and the line is not clear. It's never clear. And, there's people on either extremes, people who refuse to look, in which case you're like, you can bury your head in the sand and refuse to see what's happening, and that's an extreme on one end, and the other end, like, people are trading in this material in the way that people trade in pornography. So it has both effects of like being obscene and being able to kind of shut down. I don't know. That the word you put up.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Obscured, I guess. Obscene versus obscure, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's something that, especially in the photography world, but just in general, we'll have to continue talking about and debating. Let's see what else I need to talk to you about. I guess this is, I'm just curious too, because I saw that you have founded and run a few galleries in Tampa. Are you still doing that?
And my partner, Will Douglas, who is also a photographer, and I run a space here at our house called Parallelogram Gallery.
Okay.
And, I went to grad school in Chicago, and the Chicago art scene is very, I would say, like, the heart of it is this vibrant apartment, like, DIY space scene. Mm-hmm. And so, coming down here, it seemed like, well, in Tampa, things are so cheap, like, real estate is so cheap, you can get space. It's very easy to have space. So, I thought, like, I would open a garage space because there's a lot of really good artists here and not as many spaces to show work, and just to kind of, like, hopefully show my students, like, hey, if you come to an opening, like, maybe you can also start a space, right? That this is how it's done. You just, like, if you have an extra space, start a gallery, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what Parallelogram Gallery has been. And then I was also part of a collective of women who ran a space called Kunsthaus, spelled with a C.
I think
which is sort of dedicated to, dedicated to showing not only women, but anyone could argue was like underrepresented in the music shows, traditional kinds of like white box art shows and things. Unfortunately, that space has closed down for the time being, sort of relocating, but we don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Global pandemic.
Yeah, that hence virtual First Thursday, like right now for us. So, well, it's very nice that you have the other gallery attached to your home, so that, however you want to do it, like you don't have to leave the house to, put an exhibition online or, have appointments, things like that.
It's good. The gallery is turned into a studio space, obviously, at this point. We look forward to getting back up and running the gallery.
How long have you been doing that gallery with your partner?
We started it in 2016. I think January was maybe our first show. So, for 4 years or so.
Okay. And is it more of just like a independent space, or are you a nonprofit, or?
Yeah, we don't have any like 401c3, whatever it is, status, anything like that. It's mostly one of the primary things about it is that we want it to be a space that people can feel like they can come in and experiment in. So, one of the first shows we did, as it was Coco Hyundai, which is around the corner because our garage wasn't actually big enough, but we flipped, the artist wanted to flip a 1991 Mercedes-Benz, or have like a bunch of millennials flip a 1991 Mercedes-Benz with like 100 pounds of sequins inside of it. And so it was a type of installation that you typically wouldn't be able to do in your standard art gallery, right?
Totally,
So we really encourage people to do things that if they want to remove a wall or do something crazy, that they can, we're up to try to facilitate it.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I think those kind of spaces are always necessary to keep experimentation going. So I'll look forward to seeing what you guys do next. I guess, and if anyone has any questions, we've got about 10 more minutes, so feel free to pop them in that little question box or in the comments. I'm looking at them. So I guess the last question I had for you, any advice? This is one that people always ask, but I just always think it's fascinating to hear what people have to say. What advice would you give to an artist just starting, or someone who wants to start a gallery? Like, what is something you wish you had known before you started out?
Oh, that's kind of an easy one. Like everyone's faking it. Like everyone's just, that like seriously, the hardest part of starting a gallery is just starting a gallery. You just start it. You don't think about it. Just put a show up in your closet, whatever, and invite people and, buy a $20 box of box wine at Trader Joe's. Like, it always seems like somebody, I do think as an artist, the best thing to do is start a gallery. So I think that you get a better education professionally about what it means to be on time, like have your have your labels done and your statement and that kind of thing. Like, how do you make a press release? it really, like, you immediately learn all of that stuff with your first show, essentially. Even if you fail at it, you learn to do it. The next time you won't fail. And it changes your relationship to the art world, right? You no longer become somebody who is, like, begging to get a show at a space. Like, you have something to offer. Mm-hmm. So it gives you access. It gives you an excuse to go to an artist gallery studio that maybe you would never have an excuse to go to or to meet. And you can say, like, hey, you know, I'm opening the gallery, have a gallery in my apartment. And you learn really quickly, like, oh, what people do that you think is, like, not okay, so that you learn never to do that, right? Or, like, people's tricks on, like, how they, you know, approach studio visits or how they approach. And so it gives you a bunch of different perspectives really quickly in a way that I don't think you get as just an artist, like, looking for somewhere to put your work.
Yeah, that's
so that would be my big, my number one thing to do, to start having art.
Yeah. Okay, I mean,
and, like, that's really the way the community. I mean, that's the best thing you can do for your art community, right? Too, like, if when it reaches a critical mass, it becomes the thing to do, right? Which is how you end up with patrons, how you end up having a scene which is lively and fun and has financial support and feels like a vibrant part of the city, right? Is that you have to have people caring about it at a ground level.
Yeah. Well, I can second that advice. I learned so much from working at Blue Sky and then doing my own gallery. And so I think it's one of those things with accountability where, having been on one side, the side where, like, sometimes an artist will drop the ball and you're like, oh, there's no work here, and it's like the day before, you know? Like, that's a terrible, terrible place to be in. And once you... So, yeah. Let's see here.
I have another suggestion too.
Oh yeah,
quickly,
bring it on. Yeah.
Which is what I tell all my grad students, because I think that I feel like this happens inevitably in grad school. Is that people come to grad school and they might have gone to undergrads where they could, like, make movie, and then all of a sudden they're sort of confronted with all of this theory and critique, like intense critique, so they could justify their work. And I see a lot of artists start to make work that they know how to justify. And I am a big advocate of saying that artists should make work beyond their ability to justify it, right? Like, make something you're afraid of, like, you don't know how to talk about, because that will stretch you as an artist, right? It's okay to make things that, like, you yourself are scared of. I mean, I think that's been kind of the most exciting point in making a work, is when I'm kind of like, I don't know. I don't know what I just made. No idea how to talk about this.
Could you give an example of something?
Even if I should show, but
is there, like, some body of work?
I would say that there was a piece that I made in 2004 with an artist who I love very much. Who's doing a really amazing work out there. Also dealing with police violence against the Black community. His name is Sean Leonardo, and he's really incredible. So look him up. But I made this work with him, he essentially is me making this work called Bob and Weave. That is a video of me and him slapboxing.
Okay.
And you know, he presents as, like, a sort of large. He was a professional or semi-professional boxer for a while. So he's this large kind of 5'3", so to me, diminutive in scale. White girl, and so we kind of engage in this slap boxing fight in which he busts my nose and
wow.
And when I first made it, I was like, I don't know what I just did or what we just did. Like it feels somehow right, in terms of a work, and yet like I'm totally afraid of what to say about this. I have no clue how to approach it. And we ended up doing it a second time. It's a performance for video specifically, and it deals with like the type of image that you see in like a first-person boxing video or first-person fighter video. But it's called Bottom Weave on Vimeo.
I'll take a. I will take a look. That's what I didn't look at.
But it touches on, it's like this sort of race relation, female-male relationship. It kind of like plays on stereotypes and at the same time repeats them. I feel like there's a sort of Sisyphean aspect to it. But
yeah, there's many layers there to think about, and I can understand why that would feel scary in many more. Like
and it gets
some vulnerability.
It seems like it's it was made in 2004, the time, which I think is significantly different than now. And so sometimes you have to like revisit works that you made and go like, okay, like how do I react to this now? Like, what if this is now falls into this? If somebody reacts badly to this, it's not going to go well for me. You're afraid of work that you made in the past.
Oh, really?
I'm much more afraid of it now, I feel like, than I used to be, because I feel like the dialogue has changed in ways that it's hard to keep up with.
Well, I think that's really good thought to end on. Like, make work that challenges you, scares you a little bit. Like, I think right now also, like, it's important to know that we're going to make mistakes, but going out there and doing whatever work you're doing is important. So, we have about, looks like Instagram's going to kick us off in about a minute and 20 seconds. So, is there anything else you wanted to add before we sign off?
I want to thank you all. This has been a really critical mass was an incredible experience, and I got to come to Blue Sky last year, and so I'm really, really excited to be able to show there. It's a really wonderful space, and just thank you so much for inviting me on.
We're really looking forward to your show. And I can't wait to see, the new work you're making. And thanks for being willing to spend some time this evening with us too. I know it's later there, so. All right.